Something unusual is happening between two of the closest allies in the modern world, and the shockwaves are spreading far beyond North America. For decades, the United States and Canada have operated like two engines in the same machine, sharing trade, defense systems, and economic lifelines. But now analysts are asking a serious question. Did Donald Trump push Canada so far that leaders in Ottawa are quietly reconsidering how dependent they should be on Washington? In the next few minutes, you're going to understand what actually triggered this tension, why former Bank of England Governor Mark Carney suddenly appears in the middle of the conversation, and why some experts believe the global economic order could shift if Canada begins loosening the rope that has tied its economy to the United States for generations. Before we go further, let's do something simple that helps this community grow. If you're watching from Malaysia or anywhere in Southeast Asia, type the word global in the comments. It's a reminder that events happening thousands of kilometers away still shape the world we live in. When more people understand these connections, the conversation becomes smarter. Assalamu alaikum, and let's unpack what is really going on. To understand why this story matters, you need to start with one simple fact. The United States and Canada share the largest trading relationship between two countries on Earth. Every single day, goods worth roughly $2 billion cross the border between them. That means factories, farms, technology companies, energy pipelines, and transport networks depend on this relationship functioning smoothly. Picture a truck leaving Ontario loaded with auto parts. That truck crosses into Michigan, where those parts are installed in an engine. Then the partially assembled vehicle might cross the border again for another stage of manufacturing. By the time the car reaches a showroom, components may have crossed the border 6 or 7 times. That is how deeply integrated the two economies are. Now imagine political tensions suddenly disrupting that system. Even a small policy shift can ripple through supply chains like a shockwave. This is where Donald Trump's earlier trade policies come into focus. During his presidency, Trump repeatedly argued that the North American Free Trade Agreement had been unfair to American workers. His administration pushed for a complete renegotiation of the deal. The result was a new agreement signed in 2020 called the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, often shortened to USMCA. The agreement updated several rules, especially around car manufacturing. For example, it required that a higher percentage of vehicle components be produced within North America in order to qualify for tariff-free trade. The goal was to encourage companies to keep more manufacturing within the region. But negotiations were intense. Trump also imposed tariffs on imported steel and aluminum in 2018, including materials from Canada. The tariffs were set at 25% for steel and 10% for aluminum. Canada responded with its own counter-tariffs on American goods, creating one of the most serious trade disputes between the two countries in decades. This moment made many Canadians ask a deeper question. Should Canada remain so heavily dependent on a single partner? And that question leads directly to Mark Carney. Carney is not a typical political figure. He served as governor of the Bank of Canada during the global financial crisis in 2008 and later became governor of the Bank of England in 2013, the first non-British person ever appointed to that role. During those years, he built a reputation as one of the most influential central bankers in the world. Carney has frequently spoken about the risks of overdependence in the global economy. In speeches about financial stability, he has argued that countries should diversify trade relationships and reduce vulnerabilities that could appear if geopolitical tensions suddenly disrupt economic flows. Now think about Canada's position. Around 3/4 of Canadian exports go to the United States. That level of dependence creates efficiency during stable times, but it also creates risk if political disputes emerge. So when tensions rise in Washington, policymakers in Ottawa naturally start exploring alternatives. That does not mean cutting ties with the United States, but it does mean strengthening relationships with Europe, Asia, and other trading partners. Here's where the story becomes interesting from a global perspective. Canada already has a major trade agreement with the European Union called the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement. It also joined the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, which includes several Asia-Pacific economies. These agreements allow Canadian businesses to expand beyond the American market, creating new pathways for exports and investment. Now pause and think about the strategic implications. If Canada gradually diversifies its trade routes, the balance of economic influence could shift. The United States would still remain Canada's largest partner, but the dependency would become less absolute. And this is the moment analysts describe as cutting the rope, not literally breaking the alliance, but loosening the tight economic knot that has tied the two countries together for generations. Let's look at energy for another example. Canada is the largest supplier of crude oil to the United States, exporting more than 3 million barrels per day in recent years. Most of that oil comes from Alberta's oil sands and travels south through pipelines. But Canada has also explored expanding export capacity to other markets, particularly in Asia. Projects designed to send Canadian energy to Pacific ports would allow shipments to countries like Japan, South Korea, and potentially Southeast Asia. If that diversification grows, Canada's economy becomes less dependent on a single buyer. Now imagine you are an economic strategist watching this unfold. You would immediately see how geopolitical tensions can accelerate structural changes that were already slowly developing. And this is exactly why global observers pay attention when influential figures like Mark Carney discuss financial resilience. Their ideas often shape long-term economic policy, even if they are not directly holding political office at the moment. Let's bring this closer to home for viewers in Malaysia. Malaysia is also a trade-driven economy connected to global supply chains. Electronics, energy, palm oil, and manufacturing all depend on international markets. So when large economies like the United States and Canada adjust their trade strategies, the ripple effects travel across continents. Supply chains reorganize, shipping routes change, and investment flows adapt. Now here's a question that makes the story even more fascinating. Does economic diversification weaken alliances, or does it actually strengthen them? Some experts argue that reducing dependence can make partnerships healthier because neither side feels trapped in the relationship. Others believe too much diversification could dilute the trust built through decades of cooperation. Look at history, and you'll see examples supporting both sides of the argument. For decades after World War II, the United States and Canada built one of the most stable alliances in modern history. They cooperate through NATO, share intelligence, and jointly operate the North American Aerospace Defense Command, known as NORAD. NORAD monitors airspace across North America and coordinates responses to potential aerial threats. It represents one of the deepest military partnerships between two countries anywhere in the world. This level of defense cooperation makes a complete break between the two countries extremely unlikely. However, economic relationships can evolve even while security alliances remain strong. Think about the European Union. Many member countries trade heavily with partners outside Europe while still maintaining deep cooperation within the bloc. Economic diversification does not automatically mean political separation. So when headlines claim the global order is in shock, what they really mean is that analysts are watching a potential shift in economic patterns. Canada exploring broader trade relationships does not destroy its alliance with the United States, but it could gradually reshape how influence flows across the global economy. Now let's close the loop we opened earlier about whether Trump pushed Canada too far. The reality is more complex than dramatic headlines suggest. Trump's aggressive negotiating style certainly created friction, especially during tariff disputes. Those moments encouraged Canadian leaders to think seriously about economic resilience. At the same time, structural ties between the two countries remain extremely strong. Trade agreements, military cooperation, shared infrastructure, and geographic proximity continue binding the two nations together. So rather than a sudden break, what we may be witnessing is a gradual recalibration. Canada is exploring more global partnerships while still maintaining its core relationship with the United States. In economic terms, it's similar to an investor diversifying a portfolio rather than abandoning their largest asset. And that strategy reflects a broader trend happening around the world. Many countries today are seeking multiple economic partners to reduce risks in an increasingly unpredictable geopolitical environment. As we come to the end of this discussion, remember the key insights behind the headlines. First, the United States and Canada still maintain one of the closest alliances in the world, built on massive trade flows and deep security cooperation. Second, political tensions and tariff disputes encouraged Canada to accelerate efforts to diversify trade beyond a single partner. Third, voices like Mark Carney's highlight a growing global conversation about economic resilience and reducing dependence in uncertain times. When you step back and see the full picture, the story becomes less about a dramatic breakup and more about how countries adapt to a changing global landscape. If this explanation helped you understand the deeper forces behind the headlines, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can follow more global stories explained in simple terms. And now I'm curious about your perspective. Do you think countries should depend heavily on one major trading partner, or is diversification the smarter strategy in today's world? Share your thoughts in the comments, because the more viewpoints we hear, the clearer the global picture becomes.